Hello, everybody. What I wanted to talk about today was the importance of riff sequencing, or when you have a semblance of what you want your song to include, all the riffs and parts that you have, how you fit them together to communicate a message that you have for your song. This is kind of what I've been hitting on in a lot of my other videos, in that I feel like a lot of modern death metal bands currently don't know how to construct a song. They don't go into the songwriting process having a message to say. They are not, they're not really picky about what parts belong in each song. And, you know, obviously we've gone into the idea that how you construct a riff with the tonality of the player is very important. Your tonality is your soul as a player. When you hear, you know, a really important musician in any genre, you could probably pick out who the player is based on their tonality. And, you know, we don't have a whole lot of modern players that are bringing their own tonality to the table. So first and foremost, when you want to construct a riff, you're going to have that sense of tonality that sets you apart. If you don't have that, that tells me that you're either trying to ape another player, or you haven't thought about what you want to bring to the table musically in the first place. What is driving you to play? Maybe you want to just join the big boys and try to do your own thing because you know that other bands have done it before. But either way, that is not really the kind of inspiration that a really put together artist would have. But regarding full song construction, this is less about tonality and more about, when you have all of your riffs put together for a song, how the message of your song is communicated and how there's cohesiveness to all the parts within. And I tried to show this in the Blood Incantation video, that they really do not have a sense for how to string parts together. You can really tell by how they have their transitions lined up, and whether or not the mood of the song drastically changes when they go from part to part. And I'm not saying that dynamics are something you should avoid. You know, if you want to have between riff A and riff B a kind of a shock involved, that is all well and good if it's intentional. But the more you listen to bands, the more you can start to pick out the motive, even if it's not directly said. And if you kind of digest the full palette of what a band like Blood Incantation brings to the table, you can see that their transitions are not deliberate. They're really just the result of not knowing how to go from one part to the next. So what I want to do today is talk about a band that is very successful, or at least was, at stringing parts together and having songs with a cohesive message, a cohesive tonality, and why that differs from what you get nowadays in the modern metal band. So I wanted to talk about Monstrosity's Millennium record. This is one of my probably top 5 metal albums of all time, very criminally underlooked. I wouldn't even really call it a death metal record. It's essentially like a progressive thrash record with death metal vocals. So if you're, the thing I mostly compare it to, what I'm hearing when I hear a record like this, is I'm hearing something that sounds kind of like mid-period Nevermore, like the Politics of Ecstasy, but, you know, obviously without that kind of vocal styling. So if you like what Nevermore did in the mid-period of their career, but you hate Warrell Dane's vocals, maybe give this a try. This band is pretty much only notable right now for having Corpse Grinder in the band for the first 2 records, who's now a part of Cannibal Corpse, has been for, what, 20-something years. But in their career, they put out one record that really sticks out in their catalog, and it's this Millennium record. This doesn't sound like the record before it, Imperial Doom, and it doesn't sound like the one after it. This is where they really put their nose to the grindstone in terms of trying to have a full picture with a solidified tonality that represents the band, arrangements that had a lot of thought put into them. Every single song on this record is great, and they're all different enough where they have their own identity And when you put them together as an album, you really have a very cohesive record. It's very, very good. I can't recommend it enough. But what I wanted to talk about today was the very first song on the record, and talk about what they're doing in between parts, how they're stitching parts together, and why that is important in terms of how you want to have your song have the kind of ebb and flow that is necessary probably in communicating a song that has the kind of peaks and valleys that mimic day-to-day life, and at the same time don't have the aspects of banality that you would see in like wallpaper music that is like the modern tech death style. A lot of those bands just kind of throw everything at the wall that they can, just to kind of barrage the listener with the guise that they're being overtly technical. And that's all well and good if that's the message of your band, but this band wasn't out to be the most technical, the most brutal or whatever. This record in particular is much more technical than the others that they've done. But when you hear how they piece everything together, there's much more thought into the process that they had than let's just write as much craziness as we can within our riffs as possible. So let's start listening to this first track from the record. I couldn't find a good enough video showing the guitar close up of what they're doing, and all the live stuff is pretty terrible quality. So we're just going to listen, and I'm going to tell you what's going on in between the parts and show how a really solid songwriter can put a death metal song together, and how it really contrasts from what we've been digesting from the modern metal movement for the last like 20 years. So let's give this a listen. So I'm going to stop it right there. That was the intro to the song, and it's a lot to take in. There's a lot of parts in there. It's very alienating, but as the song progresses, you're going to hear how each one of those movements is going to be used to flesh out the song, either in transitions or as bits and pieces of riffs. What they've done here is already provided you with the musical language of the song kind of as a whole, and they're going to manipulate what you've heard as the song progresses. The very first thing that you hear, that thrash beat that you're hearing, they want to be confrontational. They want to have it be a notey pattern that is going to take you off guard, and the transitions in between that are palm muted, that sounds even more chaotic. So what they're doing is really trying to be confrontational while still giving you the palette of musical language that they're going to be using to move the song forward. And as we go, I can pinpoint to you exactly how these parts are going to be used. That very first thing you hear is kind of a semblance of what the very first verse riff of the song is going to be, but without the palm muting flourishes in between. So you're getting a slightly more basic approach to the intro within the verse riff that's about to happen, where the vocals come over the top. So before we move on to this next part, I just want to talk about what was the construct of riff A and riff B here. Both of them had like a tremolo picked open note, either palm muted or open, depending on the part of the riff that you're hearing. And then the second half of the riff becomes like a notey, chaotic thing. But what you're hearing there is, it's a little less insane than it sounds. All of the note changes that you're hearing within that pattern are a half step between them. So it is crazy sounding, but there's not huge leaps in tonality here. You're essentially getting a lot of half step quick shifts, and you're going to see that half step interval become the main driving force of the song. So they've already taken this theme from the beginning, and they're developing it further, using it as a riff, making the drums cool down a little bit rhythmically so that the song can breathe. So they're already showing some songwriting strengths in knowing how to manipulate dynamics while still having the same kind of thematic continuity that you don't see in a lot of modern bands. And I stopped it right here because what they did also here is there was a power chord little break in between all of that speed picking stuff that they are going to utilize as a riff coming up now. So they had like a transitionary thing with power chords to kind of bolster the song down, because you have all this trem picking and all of these quick switches in your intervals there, and then they have these power chords that you just really want to anchor the song down with. They teased them as a transition, and now they're developing them as a riff. Once again, there's a lot of thought put into this that you just don't see in modern songwriting. Back into the verse here. So what they did there was, instead of going from an A-B pattern, they knew that you naturally would expect the same construction of riff B as they go from riff A again, but they changed it up enough where they're still having that open note pattern and then a notey run immediately after that, but it's different. There's more, there's parts in here where the percussion section drops out to give further dynamic, a sense of dynamism there. And they're really showcasing that they understand how to keep the themes cohesive while still elaborating on them, making sure the song maintains its identity in doing so. And I think they're about to slow it down here. Let's see where they go from here. So once again, the construction of the riff is open notes, tremolo picked, and then a change for the second half of the riff. In this case, it's more slid around power chords. They know that as listeners, we've already been hit enough with the quick changing intervals of single pick notes, so that they're giving us a little bit of a palate cleanser with the power chords here. And they're gonna slow it down even further, presenting that the idea that they understand how to utilize dynamics in a song without coming off the rails in terms of losing the melodic aspects. The tonality is pretty much consistent here. They're not shocking you with, here's a very quiet part, here's a very loud part, or here's something on the lower scale of the neck, and then jumping up to shock you into thinking that there's movement within the song when you're still anchoring it down by the same root notes. They're not doing that here. So let's hear how they go from here. So we should pay attention to how they had that groove pinned down. The note choice they used for those power chords are going to come back later on under the solo, but played with a different picking pattern. So they're being very cautious about the new melodic developments they're taking on, and they want to make sure that they are going to be elaborating on them in the future. And the way this section worked out was they nailed their groove down, but they had some palm muted notey parts in between to break it up a little bit, and they took that kind of rhythmic sensibility that you get from the like hammer on pull off while palm muted, that trill thing that they're doing in there, and they made it its own riff. So you're seeing another case of what they brought to the table earlier, how they took the tail end of a riff, the tail end of a transition, made it its own riff moving forward. And that's a very successful way to let your song naturally develop, take your listener on the journey without barraging them with a bunch of unrelated concepts. By doing this, they're creating a thread to take you from riff A to riff Z. You're going to get to the end and know exactly what the song was trying to do. And they're not really using a whole lot of themes in this song. They're just developing them and varying them up enough where it doesn't become boring and it's still progressive or technical enough to showcase that they are taking the song in multiple directions while still maintaining the focus of its original intent. So let's keep going with it. So what they did there was they took the thrash part of riff A, the verse riff, and they essentially took the very beginning of the song, like the frenzied aspect of the thrash beat that they applied to it, and they utilized it during the verse riff, which is normally like a groove type pattern. So they brought back the kind of attitude of the very start of the song that had a bunch of transitions that was very hard to focus on, and they brought that sense of percussion to the verse riff to give it more of a grounding in how the beginning of the song started, and to show you that they understand their dynamics even further. They're giving multiple colors to the same themes. And you don't have to have a huge wide palette of colors and themes in your death metal song, no matter how progressive or technical you are. But what you can do is elaborate in a multitude of ways while still not losing the character of the song. And that's what this song is doing, and that's what a lot of modern metal is not doing. So let's keep going with this. Right before that, they utilized the same kind of transition they did in the very beginning of the song, still keeping it cohesive. So when you have a part like this in your song where you take all of the cymbals out, you're using this to build up towards a climax. This is a very important trope in metal songwriting and any genre of songwriting. But they're underneath what's going on is you're still having the same type of note pattern. You're still having a lot of that half note interval, a lot of the, but now instead of having it be palm muted in certain sections of the riff, it's palm muted for the entirety of the riff, except for the chord that it ends on. And when you're doing that over toms, it's a really good way of showcasing that you understand what cymbals provide for percussion, and taking the held note out of the passage and having it all be palm muted is giving it that rhythmic thud that echoes the toms. It's a really good way to showcase that they really understand what every sound of your arrangement is capable of causing the listener to feel. And they're going to successfully bridge into a guitar solo after this over kind of an explosive return to the groove riff that they set up before, but now it's going to be palm muted. So keeping it thematically consistent while still developing it. And let's just talk about that guitar solo real fast. There's two schools of the death metal guitar solo. You either have the Kerry King style, where it's a lot of whammy bar abuse, a lot of squealing. That's more of a textural solo. It's the note choice is not important. It's the importance is getting that frequency in your ear, hearing that kind of squealing guitar. And then there's the Hanneman school, where you have more of a melodic bass to what you're playing. And this solo successfully does both. At the beginning of it, it gives you that kind of Kerry King whammy bar stuff that you're going to want to hear in your metal solo, just to get that texture, to get you that feeling of familiarity that you have with older metal. And then as the solo progresses, the player is bringing out his melodicism, his tonality, by having repeating themes and making it more concrete in terms of having phrases that will stick in your head. It's not just a bunch of runs. It's not just scales. It's definitely not just scales. And that's what would be the benchmark of the modern death metal guitar solo, is putting sweeped scales in, calling it a solo, when nothing about that solo would resemble who the player is. This, you can get a feel for the player's tonality, you can get a feel for their approach, and that's what's important in denoting what an artist is. And you're getting all of that here. And underneath that, the chords you're hearing are the same chords they used in the galloped groove riff that they played maybe a minute and a half into the song. So they're bringing back those same roots, the same chords, but they're playing it in a different way to allow the song to relax before they build it to the next climax. So they're once again keeping it tonally consistent, keeping it thematically consistent. Very, very good songwriting tropes being used here. So that last riff of the song, it goes back to the former format that they used of having an open tremolo picked riff and then a notier second half. But this is a completely different pattern that you haven't heard yet in the song. So it's showing that they're able to give you an idea that you're familiar with and develop it further to give the song a conclusion. And it fades out. I'm not a huge fan of the fade out. I understand why they did it here. The next song is pretty in your face as well, and I think that the reason they faded this song out was not because they didn't know how to end it, but because they wanted to have that dynamic shift, a little bit of a break as your song or as your album develops. So that's the full song, and I think that if you listen to the song a few times and listen to what I've said about it, you can really pinpoint why records that came out before just have these songwriting benchmarks that are being very overlooked today. Now that we've listened to the whole song in its entirety, what I wanted to touch on was that in their use of transitions, they for the most part let each part flow into the next naturally. There was never a point where they had the entire percussion section drop out and had a single guitar carry the next melody for the next riff and then have the rest of the band join in to a completely unrelated idea. There was never a time where a single guitar just rang out an open chord and then the whole band went into a completely different part. Everything that happened in this song either happened very naturally in regards of having one part flow right into the next, or they introduced a theme that you would be hearing in the next part in a transitionary way, where you only get a segment of it, or you get a slight deviation of what the next part is going to be. So just another element of good songwriting that you just don't see in current modern metal. You know, I can go ahead and tell you that I think this band sucks, this band is terrible, but what I want to do is take you to that conclusion based on the objective merit of their songwriting. So, you know, I'm always gonna get hate because nobody wants to hear that their favorite band has weaknesses, because as you've developed your persona as a music fan, a metal fan, chances are you've put a lot of your own character into the bands you like. You're like, this is what sets me apart. I like this band, and if you don't like this band, you just don't get it. Well, there's people that do get it, and there's people that can see even further into what is happening in the music. So don't let your fandom kind of get in the way of your objective abilities to understand what you're hearing. There's plenty of bands I like, plenty of bands I love that are not successful at doing what I'm showing you here. But I'm not gonna say that they're great bands. I'm just gonna say that they're things that I like. And there's plenty of things I like that I know are not good. This is an example of objectively good songwriting in the metal genre. And you know, as you listen to this, you know Monstrosity, chances are you know Monstrosity is a death metal band, but there is not a lot in here that really belongs to the death metal genre. You're gonna hear a lot of chromatic stuff in the death metal genre. This is way more melodically developed, and it does not have to adhere to the death metal rules. I've seen comments saying, I love death metal because I like that it breaks the rules. And yeah, that's fine. And it's good to be confrontational. No one likes what has happened in popular music, and people want to turn it on its head and have that sense of rebellion there. And this is less about rebellion and more about having your own cohesive artistic statement. And breaking the rules is all well and good, but rules don't necessitate what the cohesive message of your music is. Like, just because you would break the rules of certain songwriting tropes doesn't mean you have to sacrifice the idea of communicating what your song's about from riff A to riff Z. And this song took this was a death metal band before, and they wanted to present you with a formula that elaborates on it. They've already broken a lot of the death metal rules. They have this very notey progressive music while still bolstering it down with the kind of death metal vocals that you're used to hearing. And while they have broken the rules, they're still providing a framework of very, very well thought out songwriting. So that's something that I'm gonna continue to look at when I hear new bands. I wanna hear that they have some thought put into what they're doing. I want to hear that they have their own tonality, and I want to hear that they're able to give you a thread to show why riff A matters and why riff Z matters and why everything in between relates to those two things. So if I don't see that, I'm going to be critical of it, and I'm going to, chances are, know that the band has a lot of weaknesses that they need to work on. Maybe they don't need to work on it. Maybe they're happy being unaware of what they have going wrong in their songwriting approach. But either way, there's a reason why albums like this, although overlooked, are going to be classics, while your Blood Incantations, your Rings of Saturn, your whatever the fuck, is going to be forgotten until the next flashy thing comes your way. So thanks for watching, and next video it'll be less of a praise-laden video. I'll have to get back to showing why modern metal is pretty awful. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.